Okay. Let's see. Gotta update my streaming stuff. I've just recently switched to streaming on YouTube. Alright, what should I call this stream? Kotlin Development. Okay. And this stream I'll do Kotlin Development with Kotlin koan and unit testing. Okay, and we gotta make this public. All right. These are all these settings. I should have set them up before. We got science and technology. And what do we have? Audience. I mean, not technically made for kids, but if they want to watch me code. English, English. Okay. All right, so sorry about that. I did a test for using YouTube to stream. Ended up setting it to private just so that I could test out how it looks. Okay, I'm Alicia and I'm here to code and develop software. I was streaming on Twitch. What I found is when I downloaded the video to post on YouTube so that people could see it again without having to see it within a week or 2 weeks, the code wasn't readable. I wasn't able to upload the video in high enough quality that you could read the code easily. I tried a few different ways of making that happen. There's a trick online that says if you upload it to YouTube, edit the video, and then restore the video, it will trigger the HD processing because you can select the HD or SD. No matter what I did, it wouldn't work. I tried recording videos locally, uploading those, recording really short videos. Nothing seemed to work. However, if I stream on YouTube, the YouTube stream looks perfectly fine. I'm using the same streaming software, OBS, and mysteriously YouTube doesn't really like making my videos HD unless I use YouTube. Seems a little suspicious, but that's okay. I found a way to sort this out. And for anyone that's coming from Twitch, I will be continuing to stream on YouTube, and I have also closed my Discord server. I just didn't really feel like maintaining it. I like streaming because it gets me coding. It's a motivator. I'm not streaming to become famous or make this source of income. So apologies that I don't really have an easy way to communicate with me, but this is sort of just for fun. All right, let's see. How should I... Well, I'll introduce what I do. I'm historically a Java developer. I use Java at work as well. I like using Kotlin though, and I would love to be able to use Kotlin in my day-to-day job. So I am trying to continue using it by streaming a little bit of coding on the weekends. I keep thinking I would like to stream during the week, and I do code during the week from time to time, but not always easy to stream. I have to switch over my work camera and all that nonsense. So maybe I'll stream in the week, but I won't have camera. What I normally do here is I'll go over a Kotlin koan, and I'll explain what that is, and then I do some coding. Today I'd like to wrap up some unit tests on one of the changes I have in progress, and I might get to some Docker MongoDB stuff if I have time. With the summer months, I'm on the East Coast of the United States. With the summer months, I am spending more time outside, so my streams will be more intermittent than they were in the winter and a little bit shorter. All right, moving over to Kotlin koan. Invoke. And I have these slides up so that it's a little easier for me to clip videos or edit videos. What is a Kotlin koan? All right, I've got some Docker stuff up here. Oh, no, this is OBS. OBS business. All right. Kotlin is a language that JetBrains has developed. Let's see if I can get the window resizing a little better. Okay, this is a language JetBrains has developed. JetBrains you'll know from various pieces of development software like Intellij, which I will be using, or PyCharm. I think PyCharm is, let's see, JetBrains. Let's look over their various pieces of software. Yeah, PyCharm, RubyMine, Intellij. They have a whole bunch of various products here. Anyway, they also built Kotlin. And Kotlin is a language that runs on the JVM. They also have Kotlin native, so it doesn't use the JVM to run. However, it makes my life a little easier because I can just switch to Kotlin and know everything, like reuse all my knowledge of the JVM and some of the Java libraries without having to learn everything from scratch, which is great. And Kotlin has a much nicer API for some of particularly the streaming API in Java can be hard to use, it's clunky, and it doesn't always do what you would like it to do. So that's just one of the features I like a lot about Kotlin. JetBrains has provided this Kotlin learning tool, Kotlin koans, and it's a way for specifically Java developers to get familiar with various features of Kotlin. Looking through these, I've done these so I have done them on previous streams, and I'm trying to work through them. Well, I am working through them, and as I get through them, I'll continue to do one per stream. One thing that you may notice if you were watching any of my other streams, or if you've ever seen these Kotlin koans before, they keep changing the UI. This UI is the third different change I've seen in the past 6 months. And sometimes they'll add new learning examples, and sometimes they'll forget which ones I worked on. I'm assuming that's part of cookies. Can't really blame them for having variability in their cookies. So this week I'm going to look at this Invoke. Invoke is interesting. I don't look at these beforehand, so I will ramble through or maybe get a little stuck. So that's kind of real life experience of going through these koans. All right, so Invoke. Objects with an invoke method can be invoked as a function. You can add an invoke extension for any class, but it's better not to overuse it. Here I can make an int type invocable, which means that I can put parentheses after this number 1 and it will call this function. Here is this invocable interface, and I would like every time you call invoke on an invocable object, it will count how many times it's been invoked. And just to keep in mind, I'll show you how this works, or how I would implement it. We'll see if that's right. And then I want to explain a little bit about how this works in terms of what it means in Java, because this might be a bit of a tricky piece for anyone who's not familiar with Java. If you're familiar with Java, you know what's going on for the most part. Okay. Just making sure I'm not missing anything. All right. This invocable class has an integer that counts number of invocations. And let's call invoke. And this should be number of invocations plus. I have to make sure I've got the variable naming. Number of invocations plus. This is the return value. So then I would return this. All right. So here I should actually write this keyword to make it more clear. Every time you call invoke on an invocable object, then it will increment this. So here, I think this is funny. You can just because it's returning itself, you can just keep chaining these. And so I can do invoke twice. So that's what the 2 pairs are. Now, what I'd like to show here, I'll try showing this in Intellij. So that's not too complicated. This looks a little bit funny. I would like to show just a little more clarity on this here. Got Intellij up, and what I'm going to do is Let's go to a different project. I recently moved I got another hard drive, and I moved all of my Git repos there, just because sometimes they get a little big, especially when I pull down a lot of open source stuff. I have a couple of projects that are, I have Micronaut itself, which is something like Spring Framework. And I have some Kafka projects pulled down. Okay. This is just a project I use to solve coding problems. What I can do though is, let's say, here's Kotlin, and I'm going to create something called, we want a directory. This project has some setup problems, so it might not work quite the way we want it to. Create new directory, we'll call it koans. And we're going to create a new Kotlin script. We'll do invoke. I want that capitalized. Invoke. All right, so I have this Kotlin script. I'm not gonna add it to Git right now, but I might add it later. Maybe I don't want it to be a Kotlin script. I want it to be something else. Refactor, rename. I'm just gonna make it KT file. Okay, and I will make this an object maybe. Just trying to think of how I would like to use this. Changing my mind again. I'm going to make it a unit test instead. Or do I want to make it a unit test? How complicated do I want this to be? Okay, I'll just show it. I would like to run it, but I don't know if I want to. Yeah, I'll make it a unit test. On the weekends, I'm typically a little scrambled, which makes it difficult to write these streams. All right, so here we're going to do new, okay, we'll do this here. New package. We're going to call it koans. I might rearrange this because it's not going to be what I want it to be. So koan invoke. All right. So we've added this. I'm going to add another class here. That's the class invocable. And we're going to have a test. We'll have test. And it will be fun Kotlin, no, koan invoke test. All right, so I've got this test. We will import that. And what I want to show, so we have val invocable A is equal to invocable, okay, and then we have val invocable B is equal to invocable as well. And what I want to show is that I want to make it very clear that this is not shared between the two. So I will do assert equals, and we'll have, gotta import that, Alt Enter. I'm on Windows, by the way. I'm on Windows 10 running Kotlin Java 11. I would like to upgrade to Java 16. I would like to play around with Java 16 at another time. All right, invocable A. So when you have these assert equals, it's not like a crazy important thing, but when you do use assert equals, you usually put the expected as the first value and actual as the second value, and optionally a message. I don't usually see people write messages. I do see people swap them. Now, in Java, you might have, say, I want this to be 5, invocable A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot, number of invocations. So I'm saying I want that to equal 5. This looks real good. But here it's expected, and then here's the value, and I can say invocable a invoke times should be 5. You can write a message like that, and I can run this. I don't actually want this function here. It's not really good to have 2 classes in a file, but I just want to show this for the koans. Okay, so that passed. And the other thing I want to show, now let's take a look at how Kotlin might be different than Java, which is what I do a lot here. So in Java, you're like, okay, I've got to put the expected one first, the actual one second, and then my message. However, with Kotlin, you can mix it up a little bit. So I can do actual equals that, and message equals that. So you can have these named parameters. And what's the other one? Expected. Expected is equal to 3. Okay, so I will change this 1, 2, 3, make it invocable B. And what are you upset about? None of the functions can be called with the environment, the argument supplied. I think maybe it doesn't want me to do it named, but that should work in Kotlin. Integer, integer. So expected actual. That should be doable. Oh, I think maybe because it's not a Kotlin class. Anyway, that can be done when you make Kotlin classes, which is kind of nice. Okay, so now we have to put this back in order. All right, I'm not gonna have a message for this one. However, it is kind of nice to be able to name them even when you're using these. Oh, you can't name them when you're using Java. That's new. Well, sometimes Kotlin doesn't work well with the Java APIs, which can be annoying because you can't use that feature. Anyway, the point is here that when you have invocable A and you invoke it 5 times, it will be 5. But invocable B 3 times won't be 8, it will be 3. And I want to highlight that this particular member property of this class is unique to each instance of the class. And that's important. Now I can do companion object and change this to be static. And so we'll have this one. Because it's static, look at me putting semicolons over here. All right, if we change it to be static, this will be different. So we will have to change how we access it. And we'll be calling this 5 times and this 3 times. So this will actually be 8 because when you make it static, it's shared among all instances. That's just to highlight how that works differently. And this is, again, if you're not familiar with Java, it can be something you mess up. I wouldn't say mess up, but it's tricky. If you want something that's shared, you make it static. The way to make something static in Kotlin so that it's static like Java is to use this companion object. And so if you ever want to make a static method for a particular Kotlin object, you would use that companion object. If you want a collection of static methods in Kotlin, you would create an object directly. And that would look like this. And so then you can have these static functions, of course, my object. And you could call this directly my object dot. If you want a collection of static objects or variables, you can use my object. However, if you want a mix of static, if you want something static on a class, you will need to use that companion object. All right, I'll leave this here, and that's Kotlin Invoke. All right, make my life a little easier and transition this. So that's what I'm doing for the Kotlin koans. And next, I'm going to do Kotlin Micronaut unit testing. And I will explain what all of this means as I drink coffee. Hopefully you have, by this point, become familiar with what Kotlin is. I've gone over a little bit. And then there's Micronaut and unit testing. Micronaut, how far back should I go here? You are a software developer and you would like to build a service. Maybe it's a web service, maybe it's a backend service, maybe it's, I think you can do a serverless function. Either way, you're writing a service. Maybe it's a REST service, gRPC, but you've got services, they've built the internet. There's many different ways to build them. JavaScript has Node Express. Ruby has Ruby on Rails. Java is often used with Spring Boot, or just Spring as its dependency injection. And there's also something called Micronaut, which is similar to Spring as a dependency injection framework that can help you build microservices. You can build other things than microservices. Like I said, you can build serverless functions as well. So I'd like to build a service, and I would like a dependency injection framework, so I'm going to use Micronaut. I typically use Spring. I like Micronaut a little better. It's a little more streamlined. I like its annotation slightly better. So here I am, I'd like to build this service. What is dependency injection? Let's see if I can explain this. Here I have my application, and I've got my main function. Of course, you have JVM static, which can also be used for static. And I call my main function. It's going to run something. However, when I run my service, I don't really want to have to start up create all of my classes manually, create all my controllers, and then for each controller, I create all my services. And I have this inject, but this inject could also be done this way, where I have var author service. So I can change this, and that would be injected. I don't really want that private. Anyway, and then I have all these constructors, and I have to call them, and that's just going to be this massive list of objects I'm creating and plugging them into other objects. It definitely can be done. With a dependency injection framework, you don't do any of this. You can annotate this and say, this is a controller object. And these different annotations tell the dependency injection framework, please instantiate one of these. And the dependency injection framework keeps track of all of these classes, instances of classes it's created. So every single one of my controllers, and a controller describes a REST endpoint, each of them has an instance that's created. When I want to use that in another object, I use this inject annotation. That tells the framework, when I create an instance of an author controller, I need an instance of an author service. So create the author service first, and then inject it into the author controller, either through a constructor or from these inject annotations. And there's pros and cons to both. I think after working on this for a few months, I would like to switch to a different model of this. I can do that later. So that's how dependency injection can help. You are taking all the dependencies, creating them, and then you arrange them and inject them. Here, the author controller has the author service injected, and then the author service has an author repository injected. And then there's these special types of classes that you add methods to, an abstract class or an interface, and then the underlying framework, Micronaut, will implement the rest of this. That part isn't dependency injection, that's just part of the framework. All right, so we have our REST controllers that has an API of author I can do a post on it and create an author. I'm not worried too much about this right now. What I have on this branch is that I've created this is a library application. You have books, you have authors on books, genres, and I would like to make this library function like a regular digital library. You can check in and check out books, you can browse books, search by genre, etc. I would also like to split this out and re-architect it. That's not what I'm going to focus on right now though. So, what am I focusing on right now? I have this book controller, and I've implemented a couple of methods where I want to get copies of books. Each book has unique copies. So a copy of Head First Kotlin might have 3 unique copies, and this I have in my data directory. Here's a book, and it has a list of copies. Each copy is uniquely identified. This is a way to kind of fake DRM so that if I have Head First Kotlin at my library, I only have 3 copies and only 3 people can borrow it. Not as many people can borrow it as possible. That's at least how my digital library works that I use. In order to understand what copies are available, how many copies are available, can you borrow this? There's many different ways I could do this. But I'd like to have 2 APIs where I can get all copies by ISBN, see their statuses, and maybe find out who they're checked out to. And then I want to get a specific copy by UUID. And then I can check the status of that copy. I don't really remember what I was going to use this for, but I think it might be useful for administrative. How many times I would like to add to the copy and add some notes, like maybe it's a physical library and the pages are dog-eared. So if I were in a physical library, I might want to have notes like damaged versus not damaged. In any case, I'm getting all the copies of the books, and I need to unit test this. When I get you want to unit test as much as possible within reason. When you unit test, you want to check the functionality of a single method within its class. When I say within its class or within its object, I mean I'm checking that this makes a call to get all book copies, and then it turns those returned copies or that returned copy into a copies response. When I go into this method, it's doing other stuff. It's calling a repository. I've got some extra code I want to implement. I don't want to test any of this. I'm going to abstract that away, mock it, because all I want to check in this unit is when you get a list of copies, do you turn it into a copy response? Because that's the logic that's in this class. And that's part of unit testing. You want to test the smallest unit possible. And the reason why you want to make it small is so that if a bug occurs, you know exactly where it happened. And part of unit testing isn't just, I'll write my code and unit test it. When you write unit tests, you often find out, well, this code is very hard to unit test. And if you find that code is hard to unit test, it often means that it's going to be hard to find bugs in that code. And sometimes when you write unit tests, you find bugs, which has happened to me recently when I was working and found some bugs in logic I implemented, though that logic was complicated to begin with. I need to, I'll show let's go, and usually there is one unit test class per actual class, and there are some times where that's different, and it might be different because you have a lot to unit test. These are really small. Just to note, the logic here is when I get a list of copies, I turn it into a response. And I put that in my book controller test. I've implemented some of them. So I think I should probably section these out, but okay. Okay, when get copies by ISBN for existing book, then return copies. So here it's, and this is part of Micronaut testing. Micronaut will actually create all the beans and run the service so that you can make a REST call. It will mock whatever you ask it to mock. Here I have a mocked copy service, so it's not going to call a copy service. However, Micronaut is fast enough that you don't have to mock anything. You can start up an in-memory database and do everything for real, which is great. At that point, it isn't a unit test anymore. You might call it a functional test or integration test. And those are useful for different reasons. It won't necessarily make it easier to find bugs, and it won't make it easier to write test cases for your code. And a note, I'm using the cucumber-like syntax, gherkin-like syntax for this with a when and then. You say when action, then expected result. This is nice because when a test fails, it says this test failed. You say, oh, okay, I know which test that was and I know what it's doing. And maybe I don't need to look at the test to figure that out. Okay, I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on here. This is already written. So the case where everything goes well has been written. But here I have this API documentation that says, well, when a book doesn't exist, I'd like to return a 404. That means when I get an exception, like book not found exception, I would like to get an HTTP client response exception and get not found. I have already implemented these tests, and that means this is covered. And if I want to double check, has this been covered, I can run this test with run test with coverage. So I can click on this arrow here, and there's a drop down that says run test, debug test, or run with coverage. When I run it with coverage, it will tell me, were these lines covered? I can see it. Actually, yeah, okay, that's fine. And if I go to, well, it's going to pop up. So Intellij, I'm using Intellij Community Edition. Any feature I'm using is available for free. There are a lot of features that are great that aren't available to me because I'm not using Ultimate. This pass, and on the right here, it has a list of the different files that are in my project. If I go to book controller, I can see that it can show here, wow, there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on here. Here I have checkout book. I didn't test that. Okay, you can stop popping up. If I go down to this method, it shows that all of the lines have been covered. Great. So just that one unit test was all I needed, right? Maybe, maybe not. This is one of the pitfalls of unit testing where someone says, all my lines are covered. I don't need to write any more tests. Since the exception I'm throwing is being handled by a different class, I have an exception handler in another location, it doesn't look like there's anything else I need to test. However, I want to make sure that if the method I called gets an exception, that exception is handled properly. So that's what I'm testing in the second method. If I write this second method, it's going to show that none of the lines are covered. So it would appear, just based on code coverage statistics, that this is unnecessary. I think it's necessary though, because we want to make sure that any exceptions that could be thrown are handled correctly. All right, now we're down to this next method, get copy. It looks really simple. It's going to be pretty boring. it'll be when a copy is returned, I get the copy response. And you might think, well, that's not particularly interesting. It would be interesting if, say, if, for example, and here's another goal of unit testing. The goal of unit testing isn't just to make sure your current code works. It's to make sure that if something changes in the code in the future and it accidentally changes behavior, that you'll know about it and you'll make sure, is this okay? So it's kind of a guardrail. And I'll show how that looks. We've got this really trivial test, and then I'll show how a change might accidentally alter functionality, and it would be great to know that with a unit test that's failing. Okay, book controller test. I do a lot of copy pasting here. Okay, I'll explain these lines as I write them. So here I'm copying this, and I'm going to move this. Okay, that's the request. I'll comment this out. All right. Here, oh, I should bring that back. I'll bring back the ISBN. Okay. How does this test work? First off, I need to create an HTTP GET request, and this is part of the Micronaut framework that lets me make HTTP request objects. It expects a copy response, and it has this URL. I'm going to add copy ID here. Copy ID is equal to UUID dot random UID. This is going to match what's in my controller. This is what it looks like. These curly braces mean that they're path values or path parameters, and those are taken in directly in the method signature. So here I have a path that's a get, and the path looks like this. I have two path parameters, path variables, ISBN, and copy ID. In my test, this looks the same, and I can pass in my ISBN and copy ID here. This is the request I want to make. The way I make it, let's ignore this line for now, is to get my HTTP client, make a blocking request to retrieve my request, and turn the result into a copy response. And that's what the result, the return value is here. So here you're telling Micronaut to make a request. Here's my HTTP request. This is the response I expect. And please give me the response mapped to copies response. Okay, easy. This is not how you write variables in Kotlin. That's okay. I will eventually, I'd like to get better at switching between the two. It'd be nice to migrate some Java services to Kotlin. We'll see. All right, what happens when I make this request? I haven't mocked, okay, let's keep explaining this here. This is the HTTP client that Micronaut gives us. It's injected, and it has the root path of book. That comes from this book controller here. That's the root path. And then anything in this controller as a method will have the root path plus search. So you can specify the root path here. I could take that away and add it to the front of all my, what is this doing here? We'll clean that up. I can add that to all of my requests, or I can just have the HTTP client do that. And this will be making real HTTP requests to my controller. I don't actually need a reference to the controller because it's making an HTTP request through the client that's connecting to the service that the Micronaut test is starting up. And that's better than calling the method directly. So I could just call this method directly. It won't do the HTTP exception handling, and I would like to test that too. So this shouldn't be necessary. I'm going to make one change at a time. All right, and we have mocks. Sorry about the crazy scrolling. And I have these mocks. So I've got a book service and copy service, which are the dependencies in the book controller that are injected. And these are mocked. So this is how you mock them in Micronaut. So now this book service mock will not call any real methods. It's not going to use the instantiated class from Micronaut. It's just going to say, don't do anything. Now if I have that set up, and let's not have this line, this test won't work. It might work. I expect it to fail on a null pointer exception or something similar, and I'll explain why. Page not found. Okay, that means that I've done this incorrectly. I think I know why. It says copies. Okay, that wasn't a valid URL. Let's try that again. Waiting for tests is extremely exciting. Okay, page not found still. ISBN copy ID. Okay. We have ISBN copy ID. So why are you saying this isn't found? I wonder about that. So I would say it should be getting a null pointer exception, but it isn't. It's, oh, well, is that right? Yes, that is right. You have to match both sides of it. So this is copy response, not copies response. I think that's right. Maybe. I'll figure that out. This is the problem with copy pasting. On the other hand, you can be copy pasting or rewriting it all. I guess that helps you remember how to write all the tests better. And then once I have this written and working, then I can copy, sort of merge this with this to get the 404. And I'm still getting page not found. Well, let's mock it and see if that, because I could be getting page not found for other reasons. I think it just can't find this URL, but I'll mock it. So if I mock this, get book copy, put in ISBN, and I tell it to return something, copy ID, then return. I need to return a copy response. Do I have a copy response in my book fixtures? Add book request. I have these fixtures, these collections of items that make it easier for me to just reuse test objects. So let's do copy response equals copy response. And what's in here that I need to add? We've got UUID, ISBN, and string. Oh, this might be a little easier just to initialize in the test. I'm not sure that I'll be reusing it a whole lot. Okay. We'll put, oh, that's not the right location. Here's the right location. Now, okay, I can do this assignment. ISBN is equal to ISBN, which is nice. Copy ID is equal to, I should have put that first. And then what's the last one? What's the last parameter? Status. And we'll do status is equal to availability.available. And the way you want to do this, so you could do .toString if you want to, and it's kind of how you would do it in Java. Or you can do the sort of Kotlin-y way, which is string interpolation. I think that's what it's called. Okay, then return copy response. And let's see if I mean, this shouldn't fix it. This shouldn't fix the problem I had, because it's saying that this can't be found. UID. Oh, it did fix it. I guess what happened was when I went into this method, it didn't return anything. So wait a second. Let me see. Exception handler. It must. So this exception handler must take null pointer exceptions and turn them into something. HTTP standards. Okay. Well, one day I'll just figure that out, but not today. All right, where's my test? There's just so many tabs open now. Okay. So here we have this. Great. We made the call. We got a response. Now here's the interesting thing. If I run this with code coverage and I go to my book controller and I look to see the coverage, it's going to say it's covered. Again, code coverage is not accurate here. You've covered the line. It means you've called it, but you haven't verified that it's correct or not. And I've seen this happen in other projects where people will make sure that all the lines are covered, but they won't make sure that the response is correct. So here, again, it might seem like a really trivial test. I'm going to say assert equals copy response, and response. So I'm going to say I want these two objects to be equal. It seems trivial because you're telling it return this response and then directly return it in the controller. How is this testing anything? I'll run this first. And this is an example of a test that's helping your future self not make mistakes. That passes, great, that's exactly what we expected. Now, if I have this copy response and I do .apply, and maybe I want to set ISBN, or maybe I want to change something about it, like this .ISBN is equal to we have to do it like this, ISBN-C. So maybe for some reason, when I, it should be, what, IT? When you do apply, you're supposed to just, okay, this dot, yeah. Why are you upset? It's, okay. That's why. I'll alter this temporarily. I'm not supposed to be able to alter this. Val is final and var is not final. Okay, so let's say I'm changing my getCopy API to append-c to my ISBN, and I say, okay, that's indicating that, you know, this is copy one of this ISBN, and I just want to make that clear. Or maybe a different example would be better. It's like string dot. I'm looking for this method. I know it exists, which is good. The next best thing to knowing the method is knowing the method exists. So what I'm looking for is Kotlin pad string, pad start. Okay, that's what I'd like. And what I'm going to do with that is I'll say I always want my ISBN to be at least 14 characters long in my response object. So I'll say pad start, and this dot ISBN is wrong, but that's okay, and 14. Character sequence. Is that, no, that's, oh, okay, it is fine. Character sequence. Oh, that's not part of string dot. I have to find out where. Okay, that's how you do it. It's not a static. Sorry, it's not static. What happened here? I'm used to using string utils, which is just like an Apache. So you do string utils dot, is blank or whatever. And so that's a string utils class, and it's static and helps you with strings, because in Java, a lot of these classes don't have additional functionality, and this is another reason why Kotlin's nice, because the strings all come with this pad start. So I can do this.isbn.pad start, and I will do 14, and I'd like to pad it with a 0. Oh, that needs to be char type, not string type. That's fine. Okay. And do that. All right, so now in this response, I'm saying that for whatever reason, I always want my ISBNs to be length 14. And if they're not, at least length 14, then add 0. Okay, so somebody made this change. Maybe it's gonna make the UI easier, or you're not gonna have some weird alignment. So somebody's happy with that. But then we go to our book controller test and we run the same test again. And we'll find out that, hey, the behavior changed. And that's one of the benefits of unit tests, that they tell you when behavior changes. For something that simple, who cares? We can probably figure out that it changed. For something that's a little more complex, let's see if I have anything. There's always something complex. So we've got a lot of these complex methods, and you're like, this is an if, and this is an if, and if. I don't know what if I change something and something goes wrong? Let's have a bunch of unit tests for that. No, this fit. Oh. No, it failed. It didn't fail. And I will tell you why it didn't fail. And this is another pitfall of unit tests. Anyway, so the point is, with simple methods, it might seem dumb to have a unit test. But you don't know how complicated that method is going to get in the future. You don't know what changes are going to come in. If somebody starts padding ISBNs with zeros, and then it turns out they're trying to do something with that in the database, you're not going to find any items because it's not an exact match. Okay, this test passed. Why did this test pass? These shouldn't have been equal. The reason why they're not equal is because it's passed by reference. And pass by reference means that if I return this object and make a change to it, then I'll see the change in the response. What I can do is I can add .copy. And the copy is a shallow copy. A shallow copy means that it will copy yeah, okay, so this fails. This fails because I padded this with zeros, but in the expect response, it's not padded with zeros. So, here I changed the functionality of my response. I applied a transformation. That transformation is different behavior than what I thought I was going to get. Okay, now I have to figure out where I put the bug. All right, pass by reference means that when anyone that gets a hold of this copy object, anyone that makes a change, that change will occur for everyone who's using that object. One way to get around that is to do a copy. I don't want anyone to change this. I would like a snapshot in time of what this object looks like, and I'll modify it on my own. I don't want anyone to suddenly change it underneath me. Then there's shallow copy versus deep copy. With this copy response, the shallow copy is okay because these are not, I need to make this val. These are not mutable. For example, I can't change the UUID. I can't change the string. You'd have to create a new string. So what are mutable objects versus unmutable objects? And for a shallow copy, it's going to directly copy everything at the top level. These are references as well, but they're immutable objects. What if it were a mutable object? What's an example? Genre response, for example. If you copy it, it's going to shallow copy the reference to the genre response. So you're in the same situation. You have a copy of the book response. Each one has an individual string, an individual int. You know, they won't have shared state, but the genre response, because it's a reference to an object, is going to have shared state. So that's a shallow copy. When you do a deep copy, you recursively copy every single child object so that it's a completely independent, decoupled item. This is, again, a tricky piece of Java and some object-oriented programming models. In functional programming, you want to make sure you copy everything. You never want to share an object. You always want to have a distinct copy of it. So that actually happens a lot in unit testing, is you'll verify A equals B. It's the same object, so any modifications you made will be shared. Remembering to use this copy object at the right time is important. So let's undo these. I don't want to transform this result. And, you know, there might be something more subtle about how the result is transformed. And I can actually just delete this. And, you know, what if there's a UI team or a mobile team that's making this request and suddenly the request changes and you say, okay, this is an external facing API. We need to make sure that this change is acceptable. So there's good reasons why you might have unit tests on these simple cases. All right, the last test for this particular class is going to be the 404. If the copy doesn't exist, or if the book doesn't exist, we will copy this code. So a lot of copy-paste surgery here, which can be good or bad. One thing that happens a lot is people will copy-paste and they'll forget to rename things. Okay, request, that's going to be this thing. Okay. And then we want to throw, and what do I want to throw? If I go to my book controller and I go to get book copy, I have this, it doesn't actually, okay, it has copy not found exception. So I need to throw that. And it takes ISBN a copy ID, then throw copy not found exception, ISBN, and copy ID. Okay. Now we can throw that exception and make sure that HTTP status not found is returned. So how is that translating? Oh, I deleted too much, of course. In these exceptions, I have an HTTP status included in them, and in the exception mapper, it will surface that. So that's how this custom exception is turning into an HTTP status, which means if you throw the exception somewhere in code, it's going to be an HTTP status exception, which is nice because then you don't get 500s for everything. And you don't have to do a bunch of try catches in the controller. Let's see if that really I changed the wrong method. So this is the disasters of copy pasting. Okay, that should be fine. Change this. This is the one I want. Okay, that should be fine. And again, this won't show any code coverage, but it's important functionality to make sure the API returns what you expect. There's kind of a mixed Kotlin exceptions work different than Java exceptions, but this is where you won't have as much checking at compile time to make sure you're throwing the right exceptions, but that's, you know, details. Okay, test failed. Check, here we go. That's expected. I knew that was going to happen. So it says you can't throw an exception from a method you say doesn't throw an exception. I have to go to the copy service interface, and I have to say you throw an exception. Not this exception. It's going to be copy not found exception. So that means that I can throw that exception in my unit tests. And that's kind of runtime, or maybe it's compile time. No, it's with Mockito. Mockito looks at the interface and says, can this throw an exception? And it says, no, it can't. So you have to add the throws annotation from Kotlin to indicate. And the equivalent would be the Java throws keyword. And waiting for unit test to pass. Okay, that means I'm done unit testing the book controller. However, there are a million other lines that I need to test. So unit testing can take forever. Okay, where was I? Here. Okay, so this one's covered. I can collapse it and say, all right, don't need to worry about that one. The book object, it's a data class, but I think you should still test to make sure things work as expected there. What happened here was there was a Stack Overflow because of how these were being fetched. So I was trying to, every time I got a book from the database, get the copy from the database, and the copy would try to get the book, and the book would get the copy, etc., etc. And so you'd get a Stack Overflow because of unending recursion. If I put transient here, it says don't get it. It will be added later, managed in the code. How much time do I have? You know, I've got this YouTube stream manager that's telling me my time, and then I have a different stream software that's telling me my time. I think I will leave it there with my unit tests. And unit testing can be kind of boring. Unfortunately, I haven't been doing a lot of coding at work for just circumstances of what the project is. So even unit tests are very exciting for me to write. Being able to write code, being able to write Kotlin code even as unit tests is also quite nice. Being able to keep up with Kotlin, even though I'm writing somewhat legacy Java code. It's nice to keep up with what's new, and that's one of the things I like about streaming. Okay. So I had other topics that I was considering covering, which I'll get to eventually, like MongoDB in my service. But that's all for today, so I'll say goodbye. I'll be back at some point trying to keep approximately hour-long streams on Saturdays with more coding. Thank you for joining, and have a great weekend.